Truisms can be oversimplified for sure, but there's a truism that's been going on for as long as I've been in ministry, and that is a truism that goes something like this: everything rises and falls on leadership. And I know for those of us who are rectors, it's something that's constantly in the back of our mind, is how do we find really great, robust lay leaders to serve and work according to their gifts in the various elements of a church? And then what about those sort of special ones who are called to holy orders? So there's a little rubric, a little truism or something that I've been using for years. It's just a string of words that I kind of 30 years ago committed to memory and that sort of sit now in the back of my mind. And that is, when it comes to raising up leaders, there are a few elements: identify, recruit, train, deploy, monitor, nurture, reproduce. So this is a short video, but let me just say a couple of things about all those things. The first thing with developing new leaders, obviously, is to identify them. And a simple way to identify them is, as you watch people in the fellowship hall of your church, in the aisles of the church, out on the patio after church, who do you see other people listening to? Like, who are the opinion makers in your church? You know, the kind of person who, if they say X, Y, and Z is good, everybody thinks, oh yeah, it must be good. Or who are the permission givers? Who are the people who say, well, the rector wants to do this or so, or the vestry wants to do that, and they say, they kind of give permission and other people follow them. Again, that's brief, but there's a couple of just little tips for identifying people who are leaders. You know, who do other people follow? When somebody says, hey, where do you want to go for lunch? Who's everybody turning to look at to see where they're going for lunch? Simple things like that. Well, secondly, once you've identified such people, you have to recruit them, which means, very much like fundraising, you have to learn to peaceably but clearly make the ask. You have to actually say to somebody, would you be interested in coming and leading in this sort of way? So recruit, make the ask. And then thirdly, you have to train them, because we rectors who've spent our whole life in seminary and church, the church is normal to us. But if you're a vice principal at a junior high school, or you work in the insurance industry or something, it's not intuitive about what it means to live and have your being around clergy and church staff and that sort of thing. So there's almost always a training component. And on this, I would just say follow the golden rule. If you were that junior high assistant principal, what would you want to know about serving in the church? You know, where would you feel ignorance is and that sort of thing. So there's almost always going to be a training component. Well, but then you can't just train people. You actually have to get them working. You have to deploy them. And this is always going to mean some sort of either simple or, depending on the job, complex job description. And that is to say, again, people are not going to feel comfortable just getting to work the way you might feel. Like if someone said to you, hey, why don't you start a men's ministry? You would know kind of exactly what to do because you're a rector and you spent your life in the church. But again, if you're an insurance agent, it might not be intuitive to you. So you are likely going to have to help people. Sometimes we think of job descriptions as being oppressive or something that we're putting on to people. But actually, most lay people will appreciate even a very simple, kind of generic job description. All right, so now you've identified them, you've made the ask, you've recruited them, you've given them some training, you're now deploying them, they're now working. Well, now what? Well, now you have to monitor them. And again, don't think of this as oppressive, top-down kind of thing. Think of it as just routine check-ins. Again, if you're a lay person, you don't know how to judge yourself. Like, they're likely wondering, I wonder what the pastor thinks about this men's ministry I'm creating. And so if you can just find a way to routinely check in with them, give them a phone call, take them to coffee, celebrate them, fund them, just check in with them occasionally. And then the next one is nurture. And that is, I think you just periodically have to have relational fun with your team. Get them together for dinner, take them out to lunch, have a coffee, just do something where you're not doing anything except for celebrating them and having some relational fun. So just nurturing them. And then in that context, you'll sometimes find questions like, hey, pastor, I'm doing this or so, what do you think about it? And that can be an aspect of nurturing, but mostly I think nurture should just be relational fun. And then kind of the goal, you might say, at the end of that process of identify, recruit, train, deploy, monitor, nurture, is reproduce. If you can get lay people reproducing themselves and others and just kind of intuitively doing the steps that I just laid out, even if they're not doing all of them perfectly, but if they can just learn to say, hey, I think this person might be a leader too. I kind of see myself, who I was a couple of years ago in them, and then they begin to recruit and then kind of turn them over to the rest of the process of train, deploy, monitor, nurture, reproduce. You've really got a gold mine going at that point. So again, it may not be completely true that everything rises and falls on leadership, but it's nearly true. And we commend this to you as just a simple way to get a leadership corporate culture going in your church.